Dragon Tears by Aurora McKnight. The pads of my fingers ached as I pulled myself onto the ledge, grabbing at a small boulder and rolling over it to lay in a tired heap in the grass on the other side. I took in ragged breaths, whispering to myself to calm my trembling. "You've got this. You've got this." All the while, my body burned with exertion. Whose bright idea was it to make dresses a female staple in clothing? And why did I always need that extra biscuit when just one would do? Gradually, the sparking at the edge of my visions receded, and I sat up to cautiously gaze around the rocks. There wasn't much I could make out in detail on this late spring night. The whisperings of a breeze stirred the grasses that rose between rocks like patches of wiry hair around dark, naked warts, and my skin prickled into gooseflesh as I regretted not dressing a little warmer. I mentally kicked myself. Living in the woman's hut was bad enough, but being told on a daily basis that my looks would keep me there for the rest of my life was worse. So much worse. But that wasn't an excuse for leaving the way I had, in a huff, to go seeking a place to cry in the woods, without a jacket, without a shawl, without common sense when the nights were still chilly enough to fog my breath by midnight. Without that trip, though, I wouldn't have come across the old woman, her wagon, her donkey, and the fire that had given me hope.
"You look like you don't have a friend in the world, girl,"
she'd said in her gravelly voice.
"You look like your woes are piled to the sky."
And she invited me to sit by her fire. After some prompting, she peeled my story out of me, an orphan raised by the local women's home, toiling for my bread and enduring jibes. No man would have me with no dowry and no looks, and no woman cared enough to take me under their wing to nurture.
"What's your name, girl?"
the old woman asked.
"Every heroine in her own story has a name."
I tilted my head. "Vitri."
"Ah," she said,
nodding her approval.
"Vitri is a strong name, honest."
I lowered my gaze to the fire and said nothing. The old woman leaned closer, the firelight dancing upon the crags of her face as she grinned. Firelight also highlighted her tattered clothing, layers upon layers of different colors and textures sewn together to patch each other into one garment.
"Do you want to know how to fix this problem of yours, young Vitri?"
My eyes darted to hers, and I sat stunned for a moment. Was she serious? There was no telling how many times I'd asked myself how I could fix it. I nodded hesitantly. The woman reached into the tattered pocket on her shirt and brought out a small vial, empty and stoppered with a cork.
"This, young Vitri, will be your salvation," she whispered vehemently. "Go to the mountain, follow the trail to Antier's plateau, and you'll find a cave."
So, here I was, on the plateau and trembling with fear, not necessarily only from cold, because what did that old woman want me to do? Capture a dragon's tear in the vial, then go drink it under the moonlight, except this was a dragon I was looking for. I took a deep breath and slowly got to my feet, gazing around to look for the cave she'd spoken of. Under the moonlight, everything took on a muted silver glow, and I caught my breath with wonder at the field that spread down into a valley slightly below me. The grasses swayed in silver waves, hissing softly in the clear night air. Dark trees dotted the landscape, shadowing large spaces below them before the enormous meadow gave way to a mountain face that rose high above. There was a stream-fed lake glittering beneath the stars. And there it was, a cave carved into a raised piece of ground in the middle of the field, partially hidden by a tree shadow and a waterfall of vines. I crept forward, noticing a strange sound on the breeze as I strained to hear it better. Within a few more steps, I could feel it in the ground, a gentle rumbling that was almost like the purr of a cat. Trying to ignore it, I reached into my pocket and gripped the vial hard in my hand. "You're doing this because you have to, Vitri. You can't live like this anymore. No more," I whispered to myself in my mind. My movements were muffled by the hissing of the grass waves and the sound that steadily increased in volume as I got closer. It was something between a hiss and a rumble that was even beginning to rattle within my chest, though the volume wasn't above the sound of a trickling stream. The closer I crept toward the mouth of the cave, the faster my heart beat, thumping painfully against my rib cage as the minutes dragged by like hours. Was I really doing this? Was it worth it? Did I really even need this tear? Was I going to die? Honeysuckle scent drifted suddenly on the breeze, and I caught a deep breath, realizing that the vines draping over the entrance of the cave were covered in the small white flowers. A moment later, I was even more thankful as I clutched the small vial to my chest and avoided the bones of a recently mauled sheep and the sharp, coppery smell of a fresh kill. Thankfully, no other bones lay about, and the sickly sweet stench of rot hadn't set in yet. I scuffed my foot as I stepped out of the grass and onto a flat rock surface before the cave. The rumbling and hissing stopped, and I froze, my eyes widening in morbid anticipation of my own death. As my heart kicked me with a painful thump, I knew that I would die of a heart attack before the dragon could sink even one tooth into me. When the sounds of sleeping began again, a painful sigh escaped my constricted throat, my chest shuddering in relief. I took a moment to tilt my head up and gaze at the stars, trying not to cry out in a squeak of fear as my throat slowly relaxed. Starting to creep closer again, I realized that the cave wasn't as large as I'd thought it was, maybe only the width of 3 horse lengths and the height of an incredibly tall man. Still, not being able to see inside or know the depth wasn't going to assist me in my quest, so I reached out to push the vining and sleeping flowers aside, revealing the head of a slumbering dragon. I gasped a little at its size, as long as a horse's back and as sleek as a greyhound. The old woman hadn't told me exactly how a dragon's tear would fix my situation, and I couldn't imagine how myself. But as I stared down at the creature with moonlight caressing its face, sparkling off of smooth prismatic scales like scattered gemstones, I wanted to cry all over again. It was beautiful. The head was ridgy but sleek in the muzzle, like the cross between a deer and a horse. Delicate nostrils moved slightly with each breath. The eyelids flickered. Was it dreaming? Waking? Already awake? I imagined myself reaching out to caress it on the snout. Would it be soft, smooth, hard and bumpy, sharp with scales, cold or warm? I couldn't tell. Even the breath that wafted out was neutral in smell and temperature, belying the rumors of smelling fire and brimstone in the presence of dragons. Maybe men just smelled the sulfur of their own bodily excretions when they saw a dragon. The dragon sighed in its sleep, whimpering. A pang in my chest tightened at the sad expression on its face, and my fear subsided a little, replaced by empathy. How many times had that been me over the years, dreaming of sadness because that was all I knew? Then a blue, molten glow caught my eye. I drew in a breath, quickly unstopping the vial that felt like it was glued into my clawed hands. My fingers creaked in protest. My hands quaked as I reached closer and closer, capturing some of the dragon's tears within the clear glass before all of them could dribble and fall. What did fall hissed upon the stone floor, turning clear and hard. Were they diamonds? I'd never seen a diamond before, but these gemstones were beautiful. And there were a lot of them scattered everywhere inside of the cave. I furrowed my brow and dipped my head toward the dragon in pity. Then, quickly and silently, I closed the vial and turned to leave. The honeysuckle vines dropped back in place behind me with a hushed whisper. A voice called as I took my first step back into the grass, reverberating in my chest. "Won't you stay a while?" My heart kicked me in the chest again as my knees wobbled and refused to move me further. Panting through my mouth, I mentally calculated the distance between me and the edge of the cliff. It didn't take me long to figure out that I wouldn't make it. Or maybe I just didn't deserve to make it. Maybe this was a fitting end for someone like me. My knees finally buckled and I crumpled hard into the grass, letting out a strangled moan. I didn't want to die. I just wanted to live a better life. "Are you all right over there?" the voice purred. "I'm sorry I startled you. It's been a while since I've had company." I said nothing in return, cowering and waiting for the teeth to come. But they didn't come. After a few moments, I sat up and peered through the thin screen of grass between myself and the cave. A pair of slitted, glowing blue eyes tilted to the side as the dragon angled its head. It didn't move. I barely breathed. Then it huffed out a great breath and lay its head down on the ground, honeysuckle vines and flowers cascading along each side of its exposed head. I waited for it to do something else, but it didn't move. The shape of its glowing eyes changed as it looked around, reminding me of the soulful eyes of a dog as it lay in its own sleepy thoughts. Fine, I thought. Let's do this. My skin prickled, tiny dots like needles flowing in waves all over my body as I slowly stood and faced the dragon. I almost wanted to try the running thing just to see if it would let me go, but it raised an eyebrow at me and beckoned me over with a tilt of its head. I lowered my eyes and picked my way forward, resigned to my fate. "You don't look happy. Do you not want to talk to me?" the dragon asked. Drawing in a breath, I tried not to whisper my reply. "Of course I do," I lied. Its eyes turned orange for a moment, and I smelled something like rotten fruit in the breeze. Then it was gone, and the dragon was looking back at me with blue eyes. "Well, my name is Adronien. Some in the past have called me Drawn." It raised an eyebrow at me in expectation. "Vitri," I said, attempting a curtsy or a bow or something polite while trying to hide the vial of tears in my hand. I knew I failed horribly, and a flush rose in my cheeks. But really, what would a dragon know of niceties? And why would I even care to look decent to it? "It's nice to meet you, Vitri," it said. "So you know, I don't plan on tearing you apart or anything so awful, so please sit. And if it's okay, I'd like to raise my head so I can look at you properly." It huffed a little. "You look like you're about to bolt like a hare." I nodded jerkily and found a rock to sit on that wasn't uncomfortable. Then I watched the dragon slowly raise its head and peer at me from a few feet above. Reaching a claw out, it scratched at its chin and stretched under the curtain of vines and flowers. It was beautiful, moonlight glinting off of scales like pearlescent, rainbow flickering gemstones. Wait, he or she was beautiful. I flushed again, not knowing how to ask the question. Is Adronien a female name for a dragon? The dragon turned to look at me, eyes crinkling and ears flicking under horns that rose and slightly curved back toward the neck, and lengths of rabbit-fine hair draped off of a mane that ran down like a horse along the spine. No, Vitri, it is not. He looked past me, into the night. It's the name passed down in my family line by my father. He was Adronien, named after an ancestor long ago. I, in tradition, am named after his son, and so forth as the line progresses. He scratched a little at the rock absent-mindedly. I think my father would have preferred a female, to be honest. They're less willful unless they're breeding. The thought of breeding made me flush again, and I fiddled with the bottle in my lap. Was that what motivated me to be here and do this unthinkable thing? The prospect of maybe one day breeding and having children to fuss over? Or to sit under the stars like this with the man I loved and do what? Talk? Cuddle? Breed? Sighing, I pushed those thoughts away. It's not for you, Vitri, not for the ugly, junky duckling. What would you even have to talk about with a man? Oh, I said, that's nice to know. After a few moments of silence, the dragon asked, Why are you so remorse, young Vitri? Why have you come for my tears in the dead of night like a thief? I fiddled uncomfortably and looked away. What could a dragon know about what I'd been through? Being reminded on a constant basis that I was less than worthy, a burden, and without even one single soul who cared about my tears and fears. Ah, Dron whispered as a tear betrayed me and slipped out, followed by another. I glanced his way to see him nodding sagely. It's like that, is it? I wiped at my tears and took a deep, huffing breath that turned into a sigh as I looked up at the stars and tried not to cry again. I couldn't talk. My throat was constricted painfully, and even the act of breathing was a hardship. When I got myself marginally under control, I said, I don't understand why people just can't be kind to each other. It's not like it would hurt them, you know? I glanced at Dron, and he nodded his agreement. You're right. When he said nothing more, I continued. No one would go without if everyone cared about others. They wouldn't go without shelter, food, clothing. I gestured as I paused, trying to pull the rest out of the deepest recesses inside my heart. They wouldn't go without forgiveness, peace, happiness, or without love. The last word was a croak in my throat, and I felt like releasing it made me collapse within myself. I didn't look at the dragon. I didn't deserve to look at him. All I could do was stare at my hands in my lap, my fingers caressing the glass vial of stolen dragon tears glowing in the shadows. A warm breath washed over my hand, and I felt like it took everything in me to raise my eyes and see what it was. When I did, my heart almost stopped. Dron's head was so close that I could touch it, the details of his nose scales sparkling as the skin beneath moved with his breath. You know what my favorite thing to not go without is? He asked, his breath smelling like sweetness, maybe caramel and green apples. What's that? I asked, reaching for his nose as he came closer. He waited while I ran my hand along his skin, scales so small and fine that they were almost non-existent. The silk-soft texture surprised me, and I wanted to cry all over again. Dron bumped his nose closer against me and leaned into my chest, forcing me to drape against him where I ran my cheek and brow over the softness. Love is my favorite, young Vitri, he told me. There are those who understand its power, and there are those who do not. He pulled away to gaze at me with his unnerving blue glow. Do not hate those who do not. They suffer in their ignorance, and your heart will suffer as it wishes them ill. I nodded. I have a proposal for you, he said as he pulled his head out of my arms and regarded me. Stay with me for a while, Vitri, and if you like stories, I'll tell some to you. I have quite a few to share, but best of all, I will share what love I have with you. My heart beat hard. I wouldn't have to go back to the woman's hut, back to the shrews that lived and worked there, spreading their poison and unhappiness like a disease. I shook my head to clear it. Vitri, remember, you're not supposed to think like that about them. They're like that because they're hurting too, right? Let it go. What do you want from me? I asked, hoping it was something I was capable of giving, a promise I could sustain. Adronien purred a little. I just want your presence. If you'd like to give me more, do so. If not, that's okay. You can leave any time. I smiled and said, on one condition, can we avoid things laying around like that? I pointed at the carcass. Adronien's purrs started hissing into dragon laughter. Of course, he said. Now get in here and sleep, young Vitri. Tomorrow is a new day, a bright day, and you need to meet it with bright eyes. So I stood and pushed the waterfall of vines aside, seeing a place beside Adronien to curl up. Maybe tomorrow would be bright. It certainly would be new. You have been listening to Dragon Tears by Aurora Moon McKnight. Dragon's Sanctuary is the next story in the series. Join Vitri and the dragon Adronien as they travel to the Dragon's Sanctuary. I hope to see you there.